Hi, this is your host, Laura Powers, and I'm so pleased to have Katherine Cronyn on the show. And we are here live with the Paris International Film Festival. This is part of the Q&A for a film that's in the festival. And the film is called Cold Call, and Katherine is the writer and director of the film. I love the film. It's very fun, very unique premise. So first of all, thanks for talking with us today.
Of course, I'm happy to be here.
So this is a very unusual film, and would love to hear a little bit about it, and then we'll go into the inspiration.
Yeah, of course. So the film is about a gentleman who's kind of an executive type who gets a phone call from a man who claims that he's holding his daughter hostage and wants $50,000 to release her. And the film is, the methods by which our gentleman tries to get out of that situation, his negotiation tactics. And he realizes by the end of the film that this is actually a prank call and that his daughter is completely safe, she's fine, and that the person who has called him is really trying to make a cash grab for $50,000. And shockingly, it's based on a true story. My dad got a call like this a number of years ago, and after he did figure it out, he didn't transfer any money, but after the entire episode, he contacted the FBI to kind of say, what the heck is this, what's going on, you got to catch this guy. And it was a scam that ran for a number of years, and a lot of people, transferred a lot of money. When you hear someone screaming on the other end of the line and you think it might be a loved one, whether it's a daughter or a wife or a sister, it's like, I think that your rational mind kind of goes to sleep and you just do what you're told out of fear. So the film is about that moment.
It's really interesting. And I think this is something that's happening at any time, but there's more and more during COVID, these kinds of like wild fraud situations of people just doing anything to get some money. So can you tell us when this happened in real life?
I think I'm not going to remember the exact time, but I believe it was 2017 during the summer. And again, luckily, my dad was not alone when he got the phone call. He was with my mother, and she realized that something was very wrong. And she called me, and I picked up the phone and said, hey, Mom, what's up? And it was very clear that I was okay. But I did have a friend whose grandparents got a call like this, and they tried to call her, and it was early in the morning, and she was sleeping. She didn't pick up, and they did end up transferring, $50,000 to these people. And it's like, after you make the transfer, there's nothing anyone can do. It's like money's gone. So yeah, they must have done pretty well for themselves. That's all I can say.
Yeah, this is wild. I love that it has that true story, but I'm glad that you guys, at least your family wasn't too damaged by the situation.
No, it's just a PTSD thing, right? It's like,
oh yeah,
that nobody ever wants to get. It's everyone's worst nightmare to find yourself in that situation. It's like my dad, when he watches the film, he gets upset because it's like, it was really intense for him to actually have that 6 minutes about how long the call was where he thought that I was going to be shot in the head. It's like, oh man, that's brutal.
There's something that happens in the body where even when we're thinking of something happening, it's almost like we experience the trauma of it, even if it's not actually happening. So I can totally understand that. So it looks like you shot the film in Beverly Hills. Is that right?
Yes.
So I'm curious what your process was like. Was this kind of guerrilla filmmaking? No.
I mean, there was a part of me that wanted to make it a little bit more guerrilla, just because, the expense of it and the ease of just trying to be a little bit smaller in scale. But really the issue was our actor, who's phenomenal. He didn't feel like he could give a honest performance if he was worried about anything on the outside, because the film takes place in a car during a LA traffic jam, and it's like he couldn't be worrying about driving the car or other cars around him if he was giving this performance, which I completely understood. It's like, he wanted to be safe all the way through, and I agreed with him. So we did end up, doing road closures and, putting the car up on a flatbed and having police escort and the whole 9 yards, just for safety's sake. It was like we couldn't risk it. And we also didn't want to do, add in the background in the other cars in post. We wanted it to feel real and give him something to react to, because part of it is that, there's nothing he can do. He's stuck in his car, he's in traffic, he can't get to an ATM, he can't, there's nothing he can do. He's completely, alone. So we filmed it all. So it was pretty intense. It was a good experience though.
Yeah, I can imagine that was a lot to coordinate. Just almost anything when you're in a public location, even if you've shut it down, is a lot to do in Los Angeles, having lived there before.
Yeah, exactly. It is a lot, especially because there's traffic no matter what. So when you start shutting streets down, people get frustrated, and since there's so much filming that happens in LA in general, people aren't as excited to see a film crew. It's more like, oh no, here we go again, as opposed to
Yeah.
somewhere else where they're like, what's happening? This is cool. So, but yeah, that's okay. I think the
Right.
frustration helped our actor Michael, deal with the situation that he was dealing with. So.
So yeah, let's talk about Michael. He's great. He's a great
Yes.
actor, and I'd love to know more about your process of connecting with him, the casting process.
Sure. Michael O'Neill is actually a friend of my father's. They're both from New York. And they've been friends for a long time, 40 years or something like that. And when I was writing it, I mean, I had him in mind. He didn't know that, of course, but I did have him in mind. And when I was finished, I reached out, I sent him the script, asked if he'd be willing to kind of attempt it. It's not a particularly pleasant thing for an actor to go through. And he's an artist through and through, and I think his response was that the film scared him, but that was a good thing, and that's why he was going to do it. And he's such a professional. He's such a sweetheart. I mean, he made my job so easy. I didn't have to worry about him as the actor. All I had to worry about was everything else that was going on around him. I would work with him again in a heartbeat. He was spectacular.
I think the casting, especially for a film like this, where it's essentially one main actor. I mean, there's other people in the cars and the people that are being interacted with on the phone, but in terms of on screen, it's really he's the guy.
Just him,
So
yeah.
you really want to get that right.
Yeah, exactly. I thought about that a lot. It's like, as a filmmaker, how do you make one guy in a car interesting for 10 minutes? And part of it is you have to have a really good actor. And he is that. And I think that, his arc from, being this executive type who's, not very pleasant and clearly estranged from his daughter, to the end where he's completely broken and he has that kind of opportunity to extend, a white flag to the daughter who he hasn't spoken to. And he does it in 10 minutes. Like, that's pretty incredible. And that's what makes it, at least in my opinion, interesting, is that you see him go through an arc, and you need someone like Michael O'Neill to be able to do that, especially if it's just one person. Like, there's no cutting away. It's just him. So
yeah, you have to have someone really strong in that role. So this is also a film that there's quite a bit of voiceover, which
yes.
more than the typical film, I think, because of the setup or the premise of the film. So can you talk about what that process was like in terms of working with doing the voiceover elements, and had you done this before, or was this your first time where you've done a significant amount of voiceover work with actors for a project?
It was definitely the first time I had done voiceover like this, because I mean, half of the dialogue is someone else speaking from the phone. But we decided to have the actor who played both the both callers, the prank caller and the woman who's kind of his sidekick, be on set with us. I didn't want to record it ahead of time and just kind of feed it into Michael, because I wanted him to be responding in the moment. And so over the course of the 2 days that we were filming, those actors were changing their performance all the time just to keep Michael on his toes. And we recorded a lot of what was happening on the day, but we also had them come in and do voiceover after the fact, just because, Michael is a professional actor and his schedule is pretty tied up. He does a lot of stuff, and I didn't think I would ever be able to get Michael back in to do, reshoots or anything like that, or voiceover for his end. So I really just focused on Michael, but I did have the other two actors there to help him. And then we, redid it all in post. So they did a lot of work, actually, considering we never see them. They were on set the entire time, and they did voiceover, and they were troopers. Especially the girl. Like, she almost didn't have words, right? It was just like an emotion, overflow. And to do that multiple times is pretty impressive.
In terms of the dialogue and what they said, was that mostly improvised? Did you have some set points, or how much of that was set in advance prior to shooting?
The conversation as a whole was pretty much what my father remembered from his call. And there were some clear points that the quote unquote kidnappers use to kind of frighten you. The idea of, sending the girl to Mexico into the sex trade. Like that was something my father very clearly remembered as a moment of, oh my gosh, I absolutely cannot let that happen, because again, father's worst fear. So there were certain moments like that, going into the sex trade and, shooting her in the head, that were kind of points that I definitely wanted to be in there. But we were flexible in terms of how the caller got there and how, and necessarily when it happened. Because again, I didn't want Michael's performance to the voiceover to be static. I wanted him to just respond to what was happening. So yes, there was some set ideas that we wanted to hit, but it wasn't, word for word, line for line perfect in any way.
So when was this produced, and when did you wrap with post-production?
So we actually shot it at the end of 2019. I think it was November of 2019. But we didn't finish post-production until almost halfway through 2020. And that was just because, with COVID, a lot of our post had to happen remotely, which was difficult, trying to do sound design, without ever being able to sit down with a sound designer and work through something, where it was all like emails back and forth and phone calls back and forth. There was just so much that was lost in translation that, that it just took a while to get through everything. But it's okay, it worked. And the editing process also took us a long time too, because it's quite stylized. So it took us a while to kind of figure out exactly what that style was going to be and if it was going to work. So post took forever, but shooting was 2 days in November of 2019.
So this is a great premise. I feel like this could become a longer movie. Is that something you've ever considered, like fleshing it out and turning it into a longer scenario?
Yeah, a little bit. It almost reminds me of Taken, the Liam Neeson film, where it's like, this gentleman gets really upset and he gets the bee in his bonnet to kind of go catch these guys who are causing so much heartache, and you think about it too, like what were they doing? They were targeting 310 area code phone numbers, which is the LA area code. And what were they doing? They were probably, sitting somewhere. They had, their drinks, their coffee, and the woman who's playing the screamer. And, they just go through and start calling, and each call takes them less than 10 minutes. And that's what they do all day. And for them, it may not be a big deal, but you're thinking about all the people that get those calls and all the heartache and the money lost. And I can imagine, as a feature, the crusade to find them, bring them to justice. So yeah, I've thought about it. I haven't written a feature or anything, but I thought about it.
Yeah, I think it could turn into something,
yeah,
longer. But I that said, I love how short it is, and that you go on this incredible journey, during this short length of a film, which is wonderful. So, what were your learning processes and points that you took away after making this film that you would take into your next film?
Well, first of all, I think that the learning process is ongoing, right? It's kind of shocking how much I learn from every project that I'm involved with. For this one, as a director, and I think this is something that every director learns, is like you really have to plan your shots out. And I did. I was so thoroughly planned out, but when you get there on the day and the timing isn't working out the way you want it to, and you have to start saying, okay, I'm not going to do that shot. It's a little bit heartbreaking as a director to say, like, oh, well, I guess that's not going to work. I have to cut it. But to be able to go with the flow, like to be able to have your plan, mapped out exactly how you want it ideally, but then also be able to go with the flow and say, okay, that's not going to work. How do we change it, on the fly? And to kind of balance those two worlds. Because I tend to be really organized and like want it to be how I planned it. So being able to kind of float in between it was a good lesson for me. Yeah, and I think that also in terms of post-production, I got pretty frustrated that it was taking so long to kind of get through the process, and to be okay with that and just say, you know what, I'm not going to rush through it, because if it's not where it needs to be yet, it's not where it needs to be, and there's no reason to finish to a deadline if it's not where it needs to be yet. So yeah, it's always a process, figuring out how to make these things happen.
Absolutely. Well, and you and everyone else in the film and television industry has been going through this process in this last year with COVID. So at least,
I know.
just know you're not alone. And even the big
No.
studios were going through that. I mean, I participated in a panel with those from Killing Eve, and they were
Mm.
doing the same thing. Trying to finish this last season remotely in
Yeah,
post.
it's
So
so hard.
yeah, it's
You
definitely
lose
been
a lot when you're not in the room with people, and you don't really realize it until you're trying to do it. But you feed off of each other, like the creative energy. Oh, let's try this. Oh, that doesn't quite work. Let's try this. And it's like you lose all that because it's all remote. It's very strange, but
I
where
do
we
think
are
that
right now.
there are technology advances that are happening now that are going to help with making it at least easier, because everyone's been kind of thrown into the water, so to
Absolutely.
speak, with this.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, I guess the one good thing now is that maybe people won't have to live in LA all the time. You know what I mean? That you can work remotely even in post, but who knows? It's all part of the changes that we're seeing.
So I'm very curious about your process for raising funds for this film. How did you handle that? And I would love whatever you wouldn't mind sharing in terms of budget aspects for
Yeah.
the listeners.
Yeah. I mean, we went through a number of different budgets and it kind of again depended on, Michael O'Neill and how we were going to make him feel safe in this very unsafe situation. So we ended up having a fairly high budget. I mean, just by the nature of having to shut down the streets, getting the permits, having the flatbed. Um, we were lucky that we got, some things kind of donated to us, like the car that was used was we got for free. Um, but in terms of getting our budget, we were lucky enough to have an executive producer come in and pretty much fund the entire thing, which was fantastic. He was amazing. And he was on set with us, and he was actually, um, I loved having him there. He was so intelligent. And sometimes I remember in the writing process, he would ask me questions like, why are you doing X, or why are you doing Y, or in the filming process, why have you decided to do it that way? And his questions were so pointed that it made me rethink why I was making the decisions I was making. So he was actually a fantastic kind of creative buffer for me. Um, but yeah, he came in and he financed it. So
That's amazing. And I think it's good you brought that up, that a good executive producer is doing more than just financing.
oh yeah,
They oftentimes are providing so much, really good guidance to help you in the process.
oh yeah, he was fantastic.
So any words of wisdom for any other filmmakers listening, in particular in regards to doing a film with, basically one main actor and not a lot of scene or set changes?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I realized in working with one actor in one location is that you really have to get creative in post. I mean, you really have to drive that energy to feel like there is an arc, even though visually not much is changing. And I also had to get really creative as with the camera work, which was hard because I was on flatbed. It's like I can only do so many angles, and I didn't have you know, unlike Chibo, I didn't have a car where I could, take the walls out and, whatever. So I think it was really an exercise in being as creative as I possibly could be and trying everything. And not everything worked, but at least I tried it. And it was amazing how much of it did work. So that's what I would say. Just let your imagination take you where it's going to take you and try everything.
That's wonderful. Great tips. And I'm curious, what's next for you, especially in light of the pandemic, in terms of filmmaking and your work?
Yes, I mean, it's been hard to kind of get anything off the ground at this moment. So I'm currently writing 2 pilots and working on a feature. I have a production company with my dad who is in the business as well. So we're, trying to get those things off the ground and, garner some interest, even though COVID is still very much a problem. So taking it day by day, I suppose. Hopefully the next thing will be a feature though. That's all I can say.
That's great. I love that. I think, well, you've certainly proved that you do well in a short film, which is wonderful. And one other question I have is regarding the cinematography, and yeah, how did you handle some of that with being such a small, set, literally like being in a
Yeah.
car? I'd imagine was quite challenging.
Yeah, it was. Especially when we were on the flatbed and the car is moving. It's like there's only so much you can do. Especially if you don't have a large flatbed where you can lay track, and we didn't. Um, so again, it was really like how can we be as creative as possible when we're on this truck and we can't move and we can't change the camera unless we take the truck back to base camp and like take everything off and start again. So it was a lot of like, changing lenses, pushing in, pushing out, trying to get movement, just really anything we could. I gave the DP a lot of leeway as we were on the truck to kind of like try what you want to try to see how we can keep it visually stimulating. But yeah, it was tough. It was tough.
So basically the car was on the back of the flatbed and then it was being driven so that the actor could just basically pretend he was driving, but appear to be moving with the background moving. Okay.
Exactly. And then the camera and the DP was on the flatbed with him. So it's like, was she in front of the car, shooting through the windshield, or was she on the sides, shooting through the side window? Or in the back is kind of hard because if you're in the back of the car, you can see the flatbed and you can see the driver, whoever's driving the flatbed. So you have to, angle down or angle to the side. But he was not actually driving at all. He was just working on the performance. I mean, and I talk about, wanting to make him feel safe, but it's also like you can't, it's fairly illegal to like have him be driving and acting and texting and being on the phone all at the same time. So we did what we had to do, but it made it so much easier for Michael because he was already overwhelmed with the call and the text messages that were coming in and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I mean, it probably would have been handy in some ways to have multiple cameras to be able to capture it all from different angles at the same time, but that just wasn't a luxury that we had. So had to get creative.
Yeah, I mean, in all honesty, just driving and texting is illegal. So
Exactly.
One more element to it. That's probably
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yep. And then, being on the phone and there's a moment, where there's someone outside the car who yells at him, and it's just like, no, we got to take away all these elements of potential danger. We didn't want anyone to get hurt.
So I understand from our chatting before that you also had a small role in the film. So what was that like for you to, be performing and then also have the director hat on at the same time?
Luckily I didn't have to do them at the same time because my part, I played the daughter. So eventually he figures out, that she's safe and she's well. And there's a very brief kind of FaceTime call with her, but we recorded that ahead of time. And then I also did voiceover post-production because I think it would have been very hard to do both. I don't know how people do that. I really don't. And maybe I could if I, got a bit more experience with it, but that was all done ahead of time.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure that made it a lot easier.
Oh yeah. She's like, okay, let's cue that video up and play. And not
Well, this is really fun. Katherine, I'd love to just see if there's anything else you'd like to share about the film Cold Call or anything else in terms of, filmmaking or yourself that you'd like to share.
I don't think so. I mean, I think we've pretty much covered it. I would say, if you're interested in checking out the film or kind of seeing what else we're up to, we have a website. It's fullcirclefilmsllc.com. But yeah, it's been great to chat with you. I'm thrilled to be part of the Paris International Film Festival, and I hope that people enjoy the film.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us, and congratulations both to you and the festival, really high class quality festival. So thanks again for taking the time to share behind the scenes of this film with us.
And thank you for having me.